The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Del Mar TV Foundation or the City of Del Mar.
Del Mar Hot Topics, where we discuss issues that are important to you. And now your host, Richard Levesque.
The forced resignation of Del Mar Union School District Superintendent Tom Bishop came as a shock to most parents in the district, and the Education Foundation funding seems to be suffering. I'm your host, Richard Levesque, and we're going to explore this controversy. The resignation of Tom Bishop and the subsequent resignation of School Board Trustee Linda Crawford has caused quite an uproar in the district. Here to help us sort through the tangled jungle of words is Del Mar Schools Education Foundation President Bob Gans and Del Mar Times editor Jim Kerr. Bob, what is the foundation and what is its purpose?
The Del Mar Schools Education Foundation is a separate, not-for-profit entity whose mission is to raise funds to support the schools in the Del Mar Union School District. It's governed by a volunteer board of parents consisting primarily of 2 parent representatives from each school. And a lot of people who come here from other places in the country wonder, why do you have this private fundraising for public schools? Well, they come from places where property tax levels are 3 and 4%, and there's a lot more money for public schools. Here, since Proposition 13 limits property taxes to 1%, there's always a crunch. And the foundation's primary goal over the past few years has been raise money to support staffing for enrichment teachers within the district, specialists in science, music, art, and technology, which is one of the things that makes the Del Mar Union School District so great and so unique among elementary schools.
Got it. So, Jim, how has this resignation affected the foundation, and why?
Well, I guess you could ask Bob that, but, but it's my understanding, and judging from the school board meeting where the resignation was announced, there's been quite an uproar, a lot of shock among teachers and parents over what they thought was kind of a sudden dismissal, shall we say. It wasn't a dismissal, it was an official resignation, but most people believe that his contract was bought out.
Why is it a shock? I mean, people resign or are let go all the time.
Mainly because of the high standards that the school district has set. I mean, they're on the leading edge of test scores. They've opened 8 schools on time. The new construction of new schools in Carmel Valley. Most people thought things were going well.
I see.
It's important, and Jim has heard me say this time and again at school board meetings, to make it clear that the Schools Foundation has taken absolutely no position on Tom Bishop's departure. We are not a political entity. We are solely a fundraising entity. However, to get back to your original question to Jim, even though we are a separate entity from the school district, because our mission is to raise funds for the district and the schools, when people are unhappy with a decision the district makes, obviously we're impacted by it. And
because people give less money.
That's right. And the question we've been getting since Tom Bishop's resignation was announced was, why should we be donating money to the foundation when the school district has $300,000 to get rid of a superintendent?
I see. So the district has paid Tom Bishop $300,000 severance. The parents who generally support you are upset that there's that much money available to pay him. Why should they give money to the foundation?
There are many parents that are upset, and I'm not fully clear on the terms of the severance. I know what I read, what Jim writes and the other papers write. But yeah, a number of parents are upset and have told us that they're not donating because of that. There are also parents who aren't upset. You know, the one thing that I've gained a real perspective on in the past year being president of the foundation is I'm at all the schools. I talk to the parents, I talk to the PTA presidents, I make the rounds. And I think a lot of people don't have a real appreciation for how diverse this school district is. In 8 schools, all in different neighborhoods, you have an incredible amount of diversity, a lot of different views out there. And there could be better communication as to what's going on at that district level.
Now, my daughter goes to Torrey Pines, and I've never heard anything about Tom Bishop being bad. Do you have any idea why he was let go?
I don't. And again, it's not something,
this
was part of the foundation's past, and it got sort of wrapped up into a political environment. And what we've worked very hard to do this year is extract the foundation from that. However, when we have a roadblock in our fundraising, we want to do everything we can to address those concerns. Because when there's a group of people in the community that are vocal, and you're a fundraising entity trying to raise funds from that community, you need to try to respond to those concerns. You can't just ignore those people. Got it.
So given that Bob wants to stay apolitical, you're part of the system. Tell us, why was Bishop let go?
Well, I think there were a couple of reasons. And the foundation was at the center of some controversy when the school board slate of Annette Easton, who's the current board president, Steve McDowell, and Catherine White were elected in the last school board election. There were some concerns over some transparency issues with the foundation.
What does that mean?
Well,
what does transparency with the foundation mean?
Not being completely above board with parents who wanted information about where money was actually going. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that is fair. It got very heated, and it was sort of at that point that I came on board to the foundation. Right. But a big issue amongst parents was they wanted to know where their donations were going.
I see.
And they also wanted to know exactly what the expense structure was. They had concerns about the foundation's overhead, and they had concerns about whether the money was actually going to their schools or whether there was too much overhead taken out of that.
Which is a common concern among charities, that the overhead eats up.
It is, and one of the first things we did when this year going into this campaign is we created a system where we were able to guarantee to parents that not only would their donations, if they designated them for their school, would stay at their school, but the gross dollars contributed would equal net dollars. There would be no deductions for any expenses associated with the fundraising, to the extent that the foundation this year has actually absorbed the cost of credit card processing fees for people who donate by credit card, which is, I don't know, any not-for-profit.
So how do you mean absorbed it from the previous year's donations?
No, for this year, if you give a contribution to the foundation, $1,000 by credit card,
yes,
the credit card company takes 2% typically of that, 2.5%. We from past years,
I see,
from reserving money going into this year, we've absorbed that. So if someone this year gives $1,000 to Delmar Hills, that money Delmar Hills gets $1,000.
So,
well, the school board also had a legal opinion that the relationship between the district and the foundation was, should we say, a little bit too cozy, and that there were.
It was a very interesting. I'm an attorney. I've been practicing for close to 20 years, and I had never seen a legal opinion letter quite like this. It was a pretty strong.
Who gave that opinion?
That was an attorney by the name of Tina Dyer, and do you remember her firm?
I don't remember. Her firm.
Right. So she gave an opinion that the relationship between the foundation and the school board was too cozy.
Right. They should be considered two separate entities.
Yeah, there were specific issues that we've tried to address since then. For example, the superintendent was an ex officio member of the foundation board. She had a problem with that. We no longer have the superintendent as an ex officio member of our board.
See.
There was an issue with respect to the superintendent signing solicitation letters on behalf of the foundation, along with the foundation presidents. We've eliminated that practice.
I see.
It's a real high wire act, though, because you try to balance the goal of remaining a separate entity so you don't run into legal problems, while at the same time acknowledging this organization exists to benefit the school district.
Right.
There needs to be separation, but there needs to be support also.
But why would coziness, what would that mean concretely, that the foundation, how could that be misused, that coziness? I still can't quite see it.
Do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean,
speaking as
part of the problem is that, these are public schools.
Yes.
And the last thing you want to do is create the impression that we are charging parents, families of public schools for services that those public schools are providing. And that is not what goes on in the Del Mar Union School District. But you want to make sure that the solicitations you're sending out don't look like a bill.
Oh, I see.
You want it to be a request for a donation. One thing that used to happen was we had a suggested contribution per pupil. One of Tina Dyer's conclusions was that looked too much like a fee for service. Now we have requested contributions per family.
I see.
Things like that. There's the education, the one thing I've learned, and I've never been an education lawyer, but I've learned from going to these school board meetings, the ed codes is pretty complex.
Now, why did Bishop, who seemed like a good guy, we had him on Del Mar Hot Topics, why was he let go? What did
I think there was a cumulative effect, the foundation being part of this. There were some other issues that were upsetting to some people and some parents in the district.
What were
one was
they?
illegalities concerning a hot lunch program.
Illegalities of a hot
right,
lunch
but
program?
it wasn't being handled correctly.
It's before my time, so
right.
not this one.
Yeah.
And another thing was the purchase of the Shores property. So a lot of people thought it wasn't handled that well. There were a lot of lawsuits involved with that, and there was some problems with the title search on the property. Just kind of a cumulative effect, I think, that these new school board members, I can only speculate on this because these are personnel matters that under law the school board isn't required to go public with. And they haven't been that forthcoming on the exact reason for Tom Bishop's the contract buyout.
So they don't have to legally or ethically let their constituency know why.
Ethically they may, but legally they're not, and they've elected not to.
It's funny because I've spoken to Annette Easton about this, and as a lawyer I understand that it's very difficult to talk about the specifics of personnel decisions. You can expose yourself to all sorts of liability. But what you can explain, and I think needs to be explained more, and Jim has brought this up a couple of times in the Del Mar Times now, is why this was a financially prudent thing to do at this time.
Right.
And I think if parents understand that, they'll be more at ease, they'll go back to donating, and things will calm down.
Right, but it seems that he was doing a good job. Most parents would say that our school district is one of the best in the country.
Well, judging by the full house at the Del Mar Hills School auditorium when they had the school board meeting where the resignation was announced, there was a lot of support for Tom Bishop, especially among teachers who turned out in full force at the meeting. And there were some unhappy people there. Wow. And a lot of people haven't gotten a lot of answers. And personally, I mean, I've editorialized this in the paper, I think people do deserve some answers on this. But as I said, the board has every right not to.
Jim, how interesting. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back to talk more about the Del Mar controversy in the school district.
Wherever you go, you see the signs. A new century is coming, and with it, 1,000 questions. Will there be peace? Will your family ever be in harm's way? Will a small town in Texas be hit with a hurricane? Will your daughter ever need a new kind of blood treatment? Will that nice man who hands you the paper ever need a hand to hold in a time of need? We have no crystal ball for the world that awaits. Just one promise. We'll be there. Whether it's in the eye of the storm, in your darkest hour, in your time of need, or in the light of day, we'll be there.
Welcome back to Hot Topics, and welcome to our guest Jim Kerr, the editor of the Del Mar Times, and Bob Gens, the president of the Del Mar Schools Education Foundation. Thanks again for being here. So tell us a little more about what you do in terms of enrichment programs.
Well, we don't get involved in the enrichment programs themselves. We're fundraisers. The schools in the Del Mar Union School District all have specialists, aside from the classroom teachers, in science, music, art, technology, and some of the schools have a physical education teacher also. The cost of providing those programs currently throughout the district, I think it's about $2.5 million a year. So the foundation was formed to help support those programs. It was formed at a time that there were fewer schools, there were fewer programs, so the number has grown. And historically, the foundation has supported about between a quarter and a third of the costs of those programs, depending on what level it's been at.
And who supports the rest?
The school district. That comes from school district revenues, tax dollars, grants, things like that.
So if you didn't do that, what would happen? If there was no money from the foundation, what would happen?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't really want to think about it. You know, the foundation is really a pass-through for private donors, for families. It's interesting, the way the school board budget currently works, the budget includes an item that's a donation from the foundation to support these programs. I think this year the plan is to create a new budget that assumes zero donation from private donors to figure out what the real number is you need to sustain these programs.
Because basically these classes in art, technology, science, so-called enrichment programs, have become basically core programs at the school. So the question is, why shouldn't the school district pay for these if they are core programs?
Yeah, I mean, you say core programs, and that's you talk about a hot topic. That's a hot topic, because if they're core programs, there's a real legal issue, the extent to which the district is allowed to accept private donations for those programs. But again, the one thing I've learned is the ed code is so complex and confusing. I don't think anyone has an answer to that yet.
But Jim, you're saying that they're doing such a good job that without them, the children's education would suffer. Without this private money, education would significantly suffer. How?
As a student becoming well-rounded and having.
So what would you not? Would you stop having science classes?
No,
you know, it's funny because we set very lofty goals this year when we started this year, because parents wanted to know where their money was going. And when the foundation started, it was started to start a music program at Del Mar Hills.
I see.
And the parents didn't want to wait a year to raise the money and then start the program. So what the district said is, fine, we'll front the money, you do your fundraising during the current year, and that will pay it. Well, the problem, that was great in the beginning. The problem is, as you get bigger and you're raising more money and you have more schools, no one really cares about the current year. Because Jim is right, these programs are pretty entrenched at the schools now, and the parents love them. What they care about is what's going to happen next year.
Yeah.
Because this year's in the bank.
Yeah.
This year's done.
Paid for,
You're not going to start firing teachers in May. What about next year? So what we tried to do this year is begin a transition from a fundraising system where we were fundraising for the current year, and then there was a crisis every spring. Well, what about next year? What are we going to have? To a fundraising system where we're fundraising for the subsequent year. There are two ways to do that. One is you take the hit in the current year, dip into your reserves, and from day one, you're now fundraising for the subsequent year. Or two, you raise enough money that you take care of the current year, you take care of part of the subsequent year, and you have a little extra left over. And hopefully in 5 years or so, you've transitioned over to a subsequent year system.
I'm not, okay. Let me ask you this. Is it mortally wounded with this current brouhaha? Is the foundation mortally wounded?
Is it mortally wounded? I don't think so. I think parents want to donate to their schools. But the question is whether the current structure is sustainable, or whether something else needs to be done, and whether there needs to be some leadership and guidance from the school district to do that. One of the big issues, again, is parents want to be able to donate to their own schools. And they want to make sure, and they're concerned about the following year. That said, different schools in this district have different abilities to raise funds.
Right.
Like I said earlier, there's a lot of diversity here, and that includes a lot of economic diversity that people sitting in Del Mar don't really appreciate a lot of the time. So what you really need to do is figure out a way to fund a baseline level throughout the district.
I see.
And still allow schools to purchase the extras that they want. What happened at the last school board meeting is the majority of the trustees made it clear that regardless of whether a school makes its fundraising goal, which includes that baseline plus the extra, they will still accept donations from outside organizations exclusively for the extra.
Yeah.
So the question comes, why do you need a district-wide fundraising mechanism if that's going to be the solution, if every school is going to do its own fundraising?
Right.
And that's the question we're struggling with right now. It's a question we're going to address at our next foundation board meeting.
Got it. Any thoughts about that, Jim?
Well, there was an equity issue also with Carmel Valley schools, because this district is a large district. And on
you mean it's very diverse. Some schools are rich, and others are not.
That's true. And that was brought up by parents in Carmel Valley mainly. I mean, I don't want to characterize them as not having less money, but Del Mar does seem to be a richer community, and the numbers would bear that out.
There's certainly some schools that raise more money from parents than other schools.
Right.
So the school board did very thoroughly examine this issue of equity, and they came up with a rather, I would say, complicated scheme, but they're basically guaranteeing a certain amount of enrichment teachers to each school in their district, and each school has the ability to purchase more enrichment teacher hours.
More positions, actually. Each school, the district assigns anywhere from 3 to 5 enrichment specialists to each school, and it's a function of the school's population, which makes sense. The bigger schools get more.
Yeah.
You have smaller schools in the district, Del Mar Hills, Del Mar Heights too, who are allocated 3 specialists, and part of those specialists are funded by private funding. But those schools want 4.5 instead of 3. So the school district came up with a formula, and when I say school district, I mean the school board, where the schools could fundraise for the additional 1.5.
Yes.
The situation that you really didn't want to happen is a situation where those schools would fundraise for that additional 1.5, but wouldn't fundraise for the baseline 3.
Right.
And so for next year, you know, if schools are going to ignore that goal, that baseline this year, the indication from the school board is they'll deal with it. That's my impression. I don't know if it's yours.
That's my impression also.
The question is, what's going to happen next year?
So it's parents getting competitive and wanting to raise as much extra as they can for their school.
For their school.
And how do you keep it equitable in a big school district?
And that's why we came up with a formula that is complex, but what it said was, okay, you're going to fundraise for 1/3 of your baseline allocation, because historically that's what the foundation had raised. Anything above that,
you can keep.
No, you can keep. You're keeping it all. It's all going to your school, but you're going to fundraise for the full amount above that baseline. So your smaller schools in the district, Del Mar Hills and Del Mar Heights, ended up with the largest fundraising goals because they have the smallest schools, the smallest baseline. They wanted the most extra. It was actually a pretty fair system. The problem with what happened at the last school board meeting is the trustees sort of gave the okay to opt out of that system. So the question is, where does that leave a district-wide fundraising organization?
I see.
But what I can say, though, is this district has done a tremendous job with enrichment programs. These teachers are top-notch. The programs are top-notch. I have a son who's currently in the district, and I had another son who went through the elementary school district, and I have nothing but praise for the programs of the school.
It's how I got started in this whole thing. I mean, I was a donor to the foundation before my son entered kindergarten. He's now in 6th grade. My daughter's in 4th grade. And it's a great cause. It makes our district very unique.
So with the funds being cut by Schwarzenegger, we're hearing about teachers being let go. How does that dovetail to what's going on?
You know, I don't really know, except to say that we are what's known as a basic aid district, which means we get the least state aid on the different rungs of districts, which means when there are cuts, we're less affected than districts that are more reliant on additional aid. Does that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's basically it.
This district probably wouldn't be as affected as many other school districts in the state.
By cuts.
Right. But it still remains to be seen.
Well, and it also, that's why the timing of Mr. Bishop's departure was so unfortunate, because that has played into the whole issue of why we should be donating at this point at a time, not only that you're raising money, but you're facing state budget cuts.
Right.
I think parents are willing to donate to their schools for their kids and for these enrichment programs. They just have some questions that weren't answered.
So you think that we can get past this and we can keep fundraising?
Well, as many people have said, I mean, the superintendent isn't the whole part of this district. There's amazing teachers, there's great staff, and they will get through this, I think.
Well, that is all that we have time for to talk about this very complex subject. Hopefully, the school board and the parents can put politics aside and work together for the good of the children that seem to be caught in the middle of what seems to have become a custody battle. Thank you to my guests for their participation. This is Richard Levac, hoping you'll tune in again for more Hot Topics next time.